Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the September 7th, 2022 regular meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission. Are all of commissioners and attendees ready?
I'm ready.
Joy, how is your AV this evening? Can you hear?
It's really clear, and the video is really good.
Okay.
Excellent.
And then we have Jake Lloyd online with FHU, and then do we have legal representation this evening, Hannah? Oh, here you are.
From last time, I couldn't really hear, so I thought, just in case, but good to see we've got it worked out.
Great. I'm glad we got everything straightened out. Commissioner Porter has decided to stay at home again this evening with some concerns, and we all recognize that. So we're all glad you're here, and we do have a quorum. Good evening again. Welcome. The Historic Preservation Commission is composed of members who are appointed by the City Council to review proposals related to historic structures and to the Guide of Preservation Manitou Springs unique historic character. The Historic Preservation Commission is made up of community volunteers who act independently, assessing the information and then acting as a quasi-judicial body to make decisions concerning our wonderful old buildings. I am going to ask any of our commissioners for approval of minutes. I have reviewed them. I have no questions or concerns.
I'd move that we approve them as presented.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, majority of approval of minutes. We are going to make a change to the agenda as by the request of Senior Planner Hannah. And she has asked us to move our other business item for presentation and discussion regarding the Felsberg, Holt, and Ulvig report to item 2 prior to unfinished business, since the report is related to our unfinished MCAC 2111 material change of appearance 183 Crystal Park Road, the McLaughlin Lodge property. And for those who are listening in or in attendance, this was part of a historic inventory that was conducted in, it's been about 18 months now, am I correct? That they did this, and these are the full cover sheets that were at one time requested concerning properties that are in historic districts. So they're more comprehensive with full historic backgrounds regarding the properties, justifying their inclusion in the said historic districts. So with that, I will say, Hannah, shall we call up our representative?
Did you want to introduce?
Oh, right. I will go ahead and let me go ahead and thank you for catching that, Pamela. I appreciate that. Let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm Douglas Keithley Edmondson, Chair of the Historic Preservation Commission.
Ann Nichols.
Pamela Wright.
And Joy Porter.
Thank you, Commissioners. Susan Presti, Vice Chair, is not in attendance this evening, and she is excused.
Great. Thank you, Chair Edmondson. For the record, Hannah Van Nimwegen, Planning Director for our City of Manitou Springs. I want to introduce Jake Lloyd with FHU to do a quick presentation regarding the items that Doug just described. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Jake. And Jake, if you have any issues sharing your screen, just let us know.
Okay, let's try that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me back. It's nice to see everybody and see everybody meeting in person again. Yeah, as was mentioned, tonight's really just going to be kind of a quick overview of some of the findings during the phase 2 of this project that we started late last year. To remind you, phase 1 was really just looking at these boundary modification requests from property owners for 2 properties, McLaughlin Lodge, which we'll talk about first. Second is the Hiawatha Gardens property, which we'll get to. And then also part of phase 1 was to review those boundary modification requests and look at providing some sort of recommendations on what's appropriate for boundary modifications. So in that process, we had to do a little bit of research. We actually conducted the bulk of our research during that phase just to have a better understanding, considering that both properties were lacking detailed information on the different buildings and the history and so forth. So even though phase 2, which is what we've just completed, what we're talking about tonight, phase 2 is really the development of architectural inventory forms, which I'll share with you briefly just to kind of give you an idea what the format is. Even though that was phase 2, we had to kind of get part of that process underway in order to complete phase 1 earlier in the year. And so at this point, we've developed the site form surveys utilizing History Colorado standard architectural inventory forms, and we've provided a summary report for each property to sort of provide sort of an overall briefing on the history of each property. So with that, we'll kind of get in here. It looks like I'm gonna have to click this. Does everything look okay so far? Is it everything's sharing okay? Sort of a basic overview of the reports themselves. They each start with sort of an introduction, provide a little bit of purpose on the historic survey and a little background on where the survey areas are, and then talk about sort of the methodology for the research that was conducted, and how we went about actually conducting the surveys themselves. And then providing in these reports a little more in-depth historic context or background overview of the history of Manitou Springs, which is really the setting in which both these properties reside. And the historic context, as we'll talk about, is really the basis for how you determine the significance of properties. And so the report kind of tries to provide an overview of that. And then we get into the results of, what we really found for each property and the architectural maybe evolution or development, particularly notable for the McLaughlin Lodge is just the various phases of development that occurred. And then we'll talk about the historic significance. And so again, here's just sort of a brief overview, really.
Excuse me, Jake, is there any possible way you can make your pages full screen or larger? We have someone in attendance that is having difficulty to see them.
Let me see. Oh, let's see if.
Okay. If it's not possible, we'll give you a second here. If that's not possible, the person in attendance that wants to see it a little bit closer just can move her chair up. Come up closer. Yeah.
Yeah, I apologize. I didn't realize it would
You should-
be difficult to see. Should I continue?
So,
And so kind of, just to recap on what the goals and objectives are of this particular phase of the project. Also, these documents, this material is provided now to the city for review, as well as HPC and the public. Anybody that would like to review this information and provide comments, at which time, we'll set a little period there for the final review of these documents. And then if folks have comments or want clarification on things, we can make those changes and sort of finalize everything, in the near future. So let's see. Yeah. Ultimately, yeah, these reports both kind of provide an overview. The project survey area, in this case, this is McLaughlin Lodge property. It's really defined by the legal parcel boundary. And the address for this property is 183 Crystal Park Road. This is one of the larger parcels that reside in this neighborhood at this point. It's a really interesting kind of natural area. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it, but the hilly topography, the fact that Sutherland Creek bisects the parcel, that all adds to the overall interest and uniqueness of this site. And essentially this property is located in section 9 of township 14 south, range 67 west. This topographical map kind of gives you an overview of where it's located relative to downtown. Really, the methodology, this is kind of gets into what were the steps we took to review prior survey work, conduct research, gather information that pertains particularly to each of these properties. We've kind of outlined that here. Really, the first step, and this is stuff that we did really for phase 1, was to conduct a file search through the state's database. That kind of tells us, whether or not the state, History Colorado, has documented records of this property. If any other historians or groups, organizations have reviewed and evaluated the property in the past. So we start there just to see what we're working with, see if there's been any work that's been conducted. In this case, the site for McLaughlin Lodge was surveyed, but it was many years ago. It was back in 1980 as part of this really large kind of overview survey of the entire city. And so the information collected was not only outdated, but it was pretty light on details, considering the scope of that project. There just wasn't the time to do a deep dive onto the property. So anyways, that provides a little bit of background. We also reviewed, we reached out to the county and received the property cards from the assessor's office. These are property information cards that are collected by the county and typically evaluate and assess the condition, the value, the sizes of buildings and structures on the property. What's really nice about property cards is if they're on record still, is that they tend to give you a glimpse of what things look like many years ago, and can also really provide some unique information pertaining to the date of construction for certain buildings, what they're made of, if buildings were removed over the course of history. And in this case, that was kind of a big thing that happened with this particular property. Is we've seen lots of development and redevelopment, changes of ownership, just due to the lengthy amount of time that the property has been known as the McLaughlin Lodge, and subsequent buildings being removed or dismantled over the period of time. So those property cards are really key to the research. Also, the Manitou Heritage Center, that was a really great resource. Back when we started this project, Michelle Anthony was still with the city, and she pointed me to Shirley Wade, who was extraordinarily helpful in the whole research process, and in picking through the records around file at the Heritage Center. So that was kind of key to finding certain bits of information that helped us document this property. Also, historic newspaper articles are unbelievably helpful. You tend to be able to find really unique tidbits of each property's history, and just different things that have occurred, the names of different businesses, who were owners, etc. Oral interviews, happened to have a real nice chat with some local residents of the area around McLaughlin Lodge. That was really helpful in just understanding some of the evolution and development that occurred over time, and how different families that live in the area have a connection to these areas, or to this particular property, I should say. So that was real helpful. We utilized the Denver Public Library and the Penrose Library digital records for just different bits of information that they have on file, photographs, etc. Topographical maps, as I had just showed you, they can be kind of key bits of information that sort of help understand where roads were located, if structures were mapped at the time, how things have changed, and that can be particularly useful. And then also just reviewing previous survey reports, building surveys, etc. We were involved with the historic survey plan project that took place a year or two back. At that time, we had access to lots of different building survey projects that have occurred throughout the city. So those were kind of key focuses for certain information for these different properties. And then just talk about sort of these previous surveys that I had mentioned. The report outlines some of the things that occurred. As I had mentioned, 1980 was kind of an important year for building surveys in the city of Manitou Springs. That was when the comprehensive analysis of the entire city was done, and that information that came out of that project led to the National Register District designation of the 3 different National Register districts in the city. However, at that time, as part of those National Register designations, McLaughlin Lodge was excluded from the National Register District, despite the fact that it's a large property with intact buildings, and it's located directly adjacent to the log cabin, Keithley log cabin area. That has some other kind of things that are probably tied to it. When properties are inducted into the National Register or nominated to the National Register, if property owners choose to opt out, they have the right to do that. So that could have played a role in that decision. But yeah, essentially, the 1980 survey provided some good baseline information for how the property was perceived as potentially significant. As I had mentioned before, the development of historic context, really kind of outlining the different eras of the development of Manitou Springs is key to not only understanding how things developed over time, where building occurred, and how the evolution of the city sort of unfolded, but it also provides a backdrop for how we determine the significance of these types of properties. So there's different eras, the pre-European settlement era, when native inhabitants utilized the area and found the area that's now the city sacred ground, and utilized the natural springs. That was very important to native tribes, the Utes, the Cheyennes, the Arapahoes, for thousands of years prior to this European settlement in the early 1870s, I should say. So that's kind of a bit of the historic context from that era. By the late 1860s, early 1870s, we're looking at the development of the area of Manitou Springs as this idea of this picturesque resort. General William Jackson Palmer, who was involved in developing the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, was real key in sort of identifying the area as a special place for attracting tourists. And so that's a whole nother era of development in the community. And so we try and provide all of this information just so it's clear where these properties fit in. For McLaughlin Lodge, auto tourism destination, this is sort of the early 20th century after World War II, or World War I, I'm sorry. This is really when automobile tourism started to pick up steam, and a lot of different modes of vacationing and visitation to the area began to change, away from sort of train arriving to this place by train to starting to have access to individual motor automobiles, and the subsequent development of auto courts and cottage camps. So this is really kind of where this particular property fits in. And then later on with, subsequent development, the area being more of a heritage tourist town with its historic properties, from the 1970s to the present, and becoming more of a bedroom community for folks to live. And then ultimately, we lay out the results of what we found. The site forms, as I'll show you in a minute, really identify the different details of the different buildings and sort of the different, the architectural background, the description of the site from an architectural standpoint, what the architectural history is and associations and so forth. But this is the results section that I'm showing you here of the report. This is really how it all fits in. Right. So I mentioned earlier, the early 1870s was this idea of creating this picturesque resort town for visitors to the area. But really the log cabin district and the McLaughlin Lodge arose out of that auto tourism era, which began in really kind of the teens in 1920s. Here's some different pictures. The picture at the top gives you an idea of what McLaughlin Lodge looked like. This is sort of the earliest photograph that we could find. This is from the 1920s. This building in this photograph is actually the main lodge, which is still there today. There are some things that have changed. There's, part of that porch has either been removed or enclosed, probably just enclosed. Brick pillars, and so some other elements have been added to the building over time, but ultimately that building still resides on the site, and that, as you'll see, is sort of the earliest of the structures that were developed there. McLaughlin's Lodge also had an airport. This is a picture from 1928 that kind of was more of a promotional piece to sort of illustrate the interesting and versatile modes of access to this site. This airstrip was located up on the higher part of the hill above the site. What is now known as Clarksley Road was probably the most likely candidate based on just its levelness and length of level crown that's there. But yeah, so there were just a number of different things that really were unique early on in this for this particular site. Later, the lodge really marketed itself as a place for comfortable amenities in a rural sort of natural environment. Originally, what's interesting about this property is that despite the fact that it's only 9 acres now, historically, when it was first developed, it was envisioned to be this really grand park of expansive park covering 500 acres or more, which kind of blended in with Crystal Park, which is farther up. It over time, I think, different cottages and individual private properties were sort of carved out of that original 500-acre tract. And, at one time, this particular lodge property contained 75 cottages, and those have all been kind of divvied up and sold as individual lots. Today, those lots are what make up some of the neighboring roads and residences that we see today. Next, what we looked at is sort of the architectural development. So this is really breaking it down into individual buildings and trying to understand the different eras of development. And so, as I mentioned, that early picture from the 1920s, this is the photo of what that main lodge building looks like today. This building and the one directly to the south were both identified as the likely earliest structures. This one obviously being first, the main lodge, the building directly to the south, which is known as units 1 and 2. They're both listed as 1925, but as that picture we showed you before up here on the upper right, it shows that the main lodge was actually preceded the units 1 and 2 to the south. But the general construction of this building and units 1 and 2 are that a round log construction, pretty standard. This is an architectural style that came of prominence in the early 20th century, known as the rustic style, and really it was sort of a return to the craftsmanship, handcrafted architectural features, utilizing materials that were native to the site, including wood, logs for wall construction, native stone, etc. So that's really what the rustic style was all about, was sort of this getting away from this overly processed, overly manufactured look of the preceding style, which was the Victorian era, and going back to more of this handcrafted kind of look. The second wave of construction, and this consisted of several cabins that are primarily along Crystal Park Boulevard to the south of buildings 1 and 2 and the main lodge, was in 1935. And again, these were round log construction buildings with gable roofs. There was some log slab siding utilized and gable ends, and wood windows, wood trim, porches. That was pretty typical of these buildings. So they occurred along Crystal Park Boulevard, and they were also constructed directly to the east, still in kind of that cluster of buildings close to the main lodge. In that 1935 wave, we see a couple of different building construction types, the one on the top being round log construction. But what's really interesting are these square or hewn log buildings that there's a couple of on the site. And this type of construction and just the condition and the age of these types of buildings really are more reminiscent of buildings that were likely dismantled from a different location and brought to this site. Really, the square log or the hewn log construction method was developed during the pioneer era. And it's likely that some of these buildings or these cabins that utilize this square log construction on this site really were salvage buildings from a different location. And they really add a lot to just the general character and the sort of the rusticness of this particular site, the one in the middle being the example of that. And then as I had mentioned, there's the log slab siding where the logs are split in half and the bark's left on, and they just kind of have a really rugged look, but they at least give you a flat surface to use as log cladding. So there's a number of those as well. These all date from that 1935 period. There was a pretty significant expansion of the cabins on this site during that period. Later, 1951, there were a couple of cabins that were built north of the main lodge. These are directly adjacent to Crystal Park Boulevard, but they also utilize kind of this log slab siding, although these are more manufactured log slab siding. By the 50s, the ranch style was very prevalent in residential architecture. These buildings were likely built with that intent. They're easy to build. The hipped roof, likely constructed with trusses, It just allows for more open floor plans and flexibility in the building layout. And so that kind of adds another kind of twist to the variation in the buildings on the site. And then 1953, this is really kind of the last of the log era on the site. There are, 3 of these cabins, but these are log cabins, but they're more of a manufactured, again, form of log or kit home, where the logs are actually manufactured off-site and then brought as a kit and then assembled. And so there's a few of those on the site, and that just, again, kind of adds sort of this uniqueness to it. These buildings kind of look like Lincoln log cabins, but they're really kind of neat and unique at this point. And then later, after, by the late 60s, the property had changed hands, and Cheyenne Village took ownership of the property and sort of redeveloped it with the idea that this would be sort of a training facility for folks to take care of the place and have sort of a good sense of purpose and stay, a sense of occupancy, taking care of the different various cabins and things of that nature. But after 1967, we see some later buildings, dwelling units that were constructed, and these really don't take any attempt to fit in with the site, the architectural style of the site or anything. So this picture here that I'm showing is like a 4-unit dwelling, and it has vertical plywood siding and sort of this unique roof form and everything. And so that was sort of later. These buildings occur to the east of Southern Lynn Creek, so they're sort of isolated from the original cabins, but that gives you an idea what else is out there. And so, as I had mentioned, the historic significance is really based off of developing that historic context and understanding where these properties like the McLaughlin Lodge fit in. Historic resources are defined as buildings, structures, sites, districts, or even objects that qualify for inclusion in the National Register of Historic Places, or the Colorado State Register of Historic Places, or even at the local level with the City of Manitou Springs local preservation ordinance for definition of local historic district. And so when we evaluate these properties through the standard History Colorado site forms, it's really focused on the National Register criteria. However, the state register criteria is quite similar to that, and so we can make some assumptions and notes about whether or not the property can fit in with either the state or the National Register significance criteria as outlined here. Just to note, anything that's designated or found to be eligible for the National Register also is automatically eligible for the state register, but doesn't work the other way. And so really, this particular property was found to be significant under what's known as criteria A. So if we look at the different various criteria A is really when properties are associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. In this case, the McLaughlin Lodge does meet that criteria. It was an early auto tourist destination and resort in the rustic style that helped sort of pave the broader patterns of development in the log cabin district. The neighborhoods we see today were heavily influenced by that, as can be seen in other log buildings that are found nearby. So criterion A, it does meet that. We didn't find a lot of information on Albert T. McLaughlin, who was the original developer and visionary for this property. There really just wasn't a lot of information on that particular person. So criterion B is really, does the property, is it associated with the lives of persons of significance from our past? In this case, we just couldn't make that association because due to a lack of information. And then criterion C is, does the property embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction? Or do they represent the work of a master or that possess high artistic values? In this case, yes, the McLaughlin Lodge, the buildings retain lots of their original building materials and architectural styles. They haven't seen many alterations overall, so they do still embody that rustic style architecture that I had mentioned. So in this case, the property would also meet criterion C. And then criterion D is this, does the property have the potential to yield information important in prehistory or history? And typically this criterion D is associated more with archaeological sites. There really isn't a lot of potential for the site to meet criterion D, mostly because of just the various ground disturbance and things that have occurred with the development of the various cabins. So that, let me share the architectural inventory forms real quick, and then we'll move on. This is what they look like. This is a survey form. The first section being just identification of the site, and then going into the geographic location information. Again, this is just a sort of a nice standardized method for documenting the property that's consistent from different projects and thorough, comprehensive. The third section of the site form near the bottom is the architectural description. This gets into what are the dimensions of the building, what's it made out of, using standardized language that's set forth by History Colorado, and then a thorough architectural description. This is a chance to just note certain things that might be of unique interest to each building. We can outline different construction dates and just talk about those various elements that really identify each building. Architectural histories, section 4 of the site form. This is where we can lay out who the original owner was, if there was an architect or a builder that was known. In this case, the builder contractors assumed to be Albert T. McLaughlin, the original developer of the property, although we couldn't point any solid evidence to that. However, he does show up on 1920 U.S. federal census of the site or the area, and so we know he was there early on. And so the 1925 date that we found from the county records for the construction of the earliest buildings falls right in with that likely date. And then again, historical associations is a place to talk about the historical context that's applicable to this site. And then the significance criteria, as we had mentioned, with the different A, B, C, or D. And then at the end of the site forms, there's a place for mapping. In this case, the US GS quad maps are used to give sort of an overview location of the site. And then we provide what's known as a sketch map. This is sort of a close-up view of the site. Aerial background gives you an idea where the different adjacent buildings and properties are located and different road names. And this, for a complex site like this with multiple buildings, this is a good chance for us to just identify where every building's located. And so they're all numbered based on the assessor's records for how those different buildings and structures were documented in the county records. And so those numbers correlate to the photographs, and those follow the maps. And so here's here's that main lodge again, a couple of different views of that. Here's the back side of that. This is a nice way, just in these survey form documents, to really get a good baseline photographs of what the building looks like at this particular point in time. As I had mentioned, the assessor cards provide photographs from 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's really neat to be able to compare what's out there today with what was there, several decades ago. And so that's why we always provide really thorough photo documentation of each site as part of the survey form documentation. This is building 1 and 2 to the south, also reportedly built in 1925. There were some modifications that occurred in the 60s. A porch was enclosed and windows were replaced and so forth. But overall, the building still retains its original architectural style, different features such as stonework and trim work and other features that are unique to this particular building. And so just in the interest of time, I'll kind of go through them fast. Here's a building. Here's one of the 1953 era buildings that I had mentioned. Some more 1935 buildings show the round log construction. They're scattered about the site. Very unique orientation, really given, there was a lot of thought given to orienting each building to give each one its own sense of privacy and to sort of also fit it in with the site and the topography. Here's one of the 1953 era buildings, that log kit building I was mentioning earlier. And then sort of the later development. Square hewn log construction, there's a couple of those. This is a 1935 era building that's still has a lot of its unique little architectural features and stone chimney and shingle siding and scalloped fascia boards. This is the second square log building that is really kind of unique. You can see it, it's sort of a hodgepodge of different construction eras and methods, but really adds to the rustic charm of this site. This one, front porch, has been enclosed. It historically was all full of windows, but nonetheless, the building features are there. There's a 1951. This is one of those ranch era slab siding buildings. It's along Crystal Park Road. It's the second one. And then some of the later development. So that is McLaughlin Lodge. Do we want to kind of skip over some of these other things? I know I kind of rambled on there for a little bit. How are we looking in the interest of time?
Yeah, Jake, actually, we have a request to review the Hiawatha Gardens presentation also. Quickly though, there's not as much relevance with that particular report that you have made up for it for this evening's meeting. So just an outline and overview would be fine.
Great. Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Jake.
Does this show up? This is the second report. So this is for Hiawatha Gardens. Again, same format, purpose, project, sort of an introduction into, where the site's located, how this fits in with the overall phase 1 and phase 2 of the project, the purpose and approach to surveying the property through History Colorado's architectural inventory forms, and then getting into the project survey area, again, utilizing that USGS quad map for general location and sort of juxtaposition with the greater downtown area. This particular property, while today we've defined the site as being sort of what's there today. It's the two parcels, the one fronting Old Man's Trail, the second one being listed off of El Paso Boulevard. Historically, it probably didn't develop that way. It looks like maybe the parcel against Old Man's Trail was the original parcel, and the piece to the east, which is a little bit larger today, it's a parking lot. I think it was sort of added later. Again, methodology is kind of the same, utilizing a lot of the same sources. The nice thing about this particular property, or the research on this particular property, is that quite a bit had already been done by Deborah Harrison, who was part of the Manitou Springs Task Force for Hiawatha Gardens, when she compiled the information for the Soul of Manitou music. I think most people are familiar with that, so we won't get too bogged down in those details, but that was a really great wealth of information that was collected. It really provided a nice sort of outline of the evolution of the site and how it was used, and just sort of its prominence as a concert and dance hall in the late 19th and early 20th century. And so again, just to be brief, this particular property was not previously surveyed at an individual level, going through the process that I've outlined here. It was included in the 1980 when the city developed its local historic preservation district boundary. The Hiawatha Gardens property was included in that local boundary. It was not, however, included in the National Register district boundary, which was designated 3 years later in 1983. Old Man's Trail sort of created the boundary for the eastern boundary of the National Register district, and with Hiawatha Gardens being directly to the east, it was not included. But it was included in the local preservation district that was established at the time. And then in 1996, the city underwent sort of a revisitation of the local historic district boundary, and it removed a lot of properties that were either vacant or just excessive, and maybe not, there wasn't a real clear understanding of whether or not it had any historic associations with the town's past. And so at that time in 1996, when the boundary was being revisited, Hiawatha Gardens was actually removed from the local district. Again, though, that sort of highlights the importance of conducting these architectural surveys and this historic inventory work. There wasn't a survey for this property, so nobody could point to, hey, this Hiawatha Gardens was associated with, early concert and dance hall development, throughout the West, and it attracted all of these big names, et cetera. So there really wasn't that information to reinforce this idea that it needed to be in the local preservation district, and it was subsequently removed. And so fast forward 2016, the city purchases the property. It's utilized for parking for a number of years, and eventually city council forms the first version of the task force to consider different options for the property, to conduct a feasibility study, and just evaluate different options for how to utilize this city-owned property for the benefit of the community. Just fast forward from there, here we are. The property has documented historic significance. Again, that's really to the praise of the local historians who donated their time and research to the understanding and research of the property. And so the building is really looked at now as having a potential significance. Where does it fit in the historic context? Really, it's in this idea of sort of the picturesque resort and tourism. It's sort of kind of that gray area where the two overlap. And tourism in the city was starting to pick up steam in the late 19th century. So that really plays a kind of a big role in how the Hiawatha Gardens is evaluated. You know, the city attracted a lot of visitors early on from a health seeking standpoint. Patients of tuberculosis were attracted to the dry climate, the sunny, dry weather, which was really conducive to just healing and regenerating. But also the mineral springs played a huge role in that. And so that was a local attraction early on. And there were a number of other different attractions, but really they were more just kind of natural. You know, this was like a place to see the natural wonders of the world. And it was in the last decade, really, of the 19th century that Colonel Frank L.M. Smith and Charles Allison envisioned sort of a place for, you know, gentlemen only kind of club, gambling, drinking. This was, you know, another form of attracting folks to the small quaint town. But really, you know, that had sort of a short life. There was a real desire to make this, to make Manitou Springs and make this particular site more of a family-oriented destination. And so shortly after the Gentlemen's Only Club was developed, this large open pavilion structure was constructed to the site, to the south end of the site, as you can see in the second photograph there to the south. This structure was constructed in 1897, so that was only, you know, it's less than a decade after the original Victorian club was built. And the pavilion really had this the goal of constructing this pavilion was to attract you know, concerts and dancing and that sort of those sorts of events. And so that kind of was the impetus for creating this pavilion, which operated as a concert hall from when it was built in 1897 till 1904. And then it was later, the property was later acquired by the Hiawatha Park Opera Company, and a large flyover, which we didn't show a picture of that, but a big theater flyover structure was built on the south end that was later removed as the structure was enclosed. But it went through sort of a number of different uses there, hosting just a diverse array of different things aside from concerts, also vaudeville. There were boxing matches that were held in this venue at one point. And so it really kind of had it developed this local following for its event space in the early 20th century. And at one point, the original Victorian portion of the site, which is to the north, in 1920, it actually caught on fire and it burned to the ground. And so there was this desperation into trying to figure out how to reutilize the site. And quickly, the success of the dance hall and the concert venue led to the redevelopment of the site immediately. And the following year, the north end was completely reconstructed. Of course, it had a different format. It was really focused on expanding this dance area, this dance hall space, as you can see in the picture to the bottom. And so this was sort of how the property evolved throughout the first couple of decades of the 20th century. Later, dancing, you know, was sort of all the rave and really took over the use of this site. Big band music gained importance in the 30s. It was sort of this resurgence of getting orchestras again, but more on the big band, genre with these some of these big names that were coming through the Manitou Springs area, and just the names like Fred Waring and Duke Ellington played at this venue throughout the early 20th century. That was sort of how the place evolved. And so the structure itself was enclosed. It was there was a need to create sort of a finished interior space, whereas before it had been kind of an open pavilion. And so this was later, the Hiawatha Gardens venue was later sort of dubbed the largest and best ballroom, and it rivaled some of the other nearby dance halls in the region. And so really up through about the late 1950s, the Hiawatha Gardens had this big following for different dancing and big band uses. And really that's where a lot of its significance is derived. But by the late 1950s, the site had changed ownership, and so it sort of underwent a big format change, and ended up being converted into a restaurant. The restaurant was called the Sundown Lodge, and it still offered family entertainment, but it was it was during an era when big band music lost popularity and other things became important, and so the restaurant business kind of continued up through the 70s. In the 90s, it sort of expanded again. There was a different restaurant use. However, the actual pavilion structure that we see today had really no use, and it wasn't utilized anymore. And so it kind of sat vacant for a number of years, and just kind of lost its importance. And so that's kind of where the structure itself fits into the significance of Manitou Springs history, is this idea that it's part of this early entertainment, recreational amenity for the community, one that was well known across the country, throughout the region, and one that had the provenance of some of the big band names come through. Now today, a lot of the structure has been removed. That plays a little bit into how it's perceived in that context. The north end of the site that we see in the earlier photos has been removed, and it's really just a dance hall that's left. But the dance hall is really the portion of the structure that carries the significance of that entertainment and recreational use. And so when we're evaluating the significance of this one, we look at, has this property contributed or made a significant association with that historic context of entertainment and recreation. And in this case, I would say that the dance hall does. I think it meets criterion A, despite the fact that a lot of the structure has been removed. We really, again, couldn't tie the property's significance to any particular people. And since a lot of the structure has been removed over time, that it's kind of hard to say that it would meet criterion C, just because from an exterior standpoint, a lot of the building materials, details, and so forth have been lost to just alterations and changes in the actual building. So this particular property, I would say, is eligible under criterion A just for its association with early entertainment and recreation in Manitou Springs. And as a result, it meets the criteria of the state register. And recently it was inducted into the local Manitou Springs commercial core sub-district. So hopefully that's kind of succinct enough. Here's the site forms for that. Again, the same format, all the different properties that are utilizing these forms. It's just kind of a nice standard format to put all of this information in so that it's easy to retrieve at a later date. And again, documenting the history, changes, different owners, different uses, etc., and then documenting its significance. Here's some maps. And then some existing photographs of the site. So again, the north end of the structure is gone, but it still does retain its unique queen rod truss system. The interior portions of the space are very unique. All of this exterior trim that you can see under the soffits and the frieze board, those are all unique elements that kind of give you a taste of what the original detailing looked like. And then underneath, looking at the substructure, stone foundation, the roofs on floor joists, etc. Those are all unique components that kind of help illustrate the different eras of its development. So that I'm going to end there. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them at this point.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lloyd, for those comprehensive reviews of the properties in question. Do any of the commissioners or staff have questions for Mr. Lloyd? Planner Van Nijmegen? Planner Becker?
Thank you, Chair Edmondson. Staff does not have any questions at this time.
Very good.
Maybe just one question for Hannah. So what step now? Just died.
Thank you, Commissioner Nichols, for that question. So at this point, this is a conclusion of phase 2. And so we will share the documents that have been presented to the commission we'll share with the commission the documents that were presented tonight. And if you have any comments, concerns, or questions on those documents, there will be an opportunity to voice those. If there isn't any concerns, then we would move forward to the final phase, which would be producing these final reports. Then at that point, we would be publishing them, sharing them with the public in this set, and determining what those next steps should be. So it's a little ambiguous, but this is making sure that the reports make sense, that it's what you would expect, and things like that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Porter, do you have any questions for Mr. Lloyd?
No questions. It was just so thorough to hear all about the lodge and then Hiawatha. The history there is amazing, and you really summed it up and brought those details to us. Appreciate that.
Very good. Thank you. Commissioner Wright? Okay, I do have a quick question for Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Lloyd, do you make any mention of contributing or non-contributing structures in your report concerning the McLaughlin Lodge property?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe we did identify that last phase of the development, those structures as dwelling units that don't contribute to the architectural significance of the property. Those are the ones built between 1967 and roughly 1985. But if I missed that, I'll go through there and be sure to add that for the final version. But yeah, that was a sort of an important
thing for us to try and identify right away was, you know, which of those structures, since there are so many, contribute to the significance of the site.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. And I would like to point out that after I reviewed Mr. Lloyd's report, that he does identify 7 structures in McLaughlin Lodge property that are considered non-contributing. And Planner Becker, if you could just make sure everybody gets copies of those reports, I'd really appreciate it.
Will do.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, staff and attendees, thank you very much for your patience. These are the kind of reports that the commission receives that help us make comprehensive decisions on MCACs and other applications that are put before it. And at this point, I'm going to say thank you again, Mr. Lloyd, for your presentation, and we will move on now to unfinished business. Item 2, MCAC 2111 material change of appearance certification demolition at 183 Crystal Park Road. William Gooman and Associates are the applicant on behalf of the Manitou Cabins LLC owners. And I will ask any commissioners if they have any ex parte communication or any other influence that may cause them to want to recuse themselves.
No.
No.
Very good. Well, if we could bring the applicant up and we can hear the staff report.
Good evening, commissioners. Tonight's item is a request for demolition of 3 structures in the Keithley Log Cabin Subdistrict at 183 Crystal Park Road. The applicant for the request is Bill Gooman of William Gooman and Associates on behalf of Manitou Cabins LLC owner. As I just mentioned, the 3 structures that are proposed for demolition are 1 maintenance shop constructed in 1975 and 2 duplexes constructed in 1967. So the site plan depicts the maintenance shop here near the northern boundary and the 2 duplexes closer to the eastern border there. In order to provide access to the proposed vacant lots that are intended to be sold by the developer to private ownership, an internal access road has been provided or proposed on the property, and that's shown here with a fire turnaround. The access has been required by the city to align with Mountain View Road, which is just on the other side of Sutherland Road here. And so the requirement is that the new access road aligns with Mountain View Road here. The access has been required, as I mentioned, to align with the end of Mountain View Road. The alignment and placement of the access as shown is needed to allow the proposed vacant lots to be sold by the developer. The access alignment is restricted by the need to create code compliant lots. Those are the vacant lots that they're proposing here. Let's see. Without the ability to provide this access as shown, the developer would not be able to make the overall project economically feasible. The developer's intent is to subdivide and sell the vacant lots on the east side of the property to help offset the costs of rehabilitating the existing and remaining cabins. The maintenance shop lies directly in the proposed alignment of that access. As you can see here, it's right in the middle of that road. And due to that, that's the main reason for requesting the demolition of that maintenance shop. The two duplexes that are also requested for demolition due to curb, gutter, fire truck access and turnaround requirements are also a hindrance to the proposed development of the property and will likely encroach into the proposed fire turnaround area. You can see that depicted here. The applicant has indicated that the owner would suffer an economic hardship if the requested demolitions were not approved, as this would not allow for the creation of that access and would not allow them to create and subdivide those lots. So regarding the demolition process, the code states in section 1704-080C2 that staff shall determine if the structures in question are A, primary structures over 50 years old or less than 50 years old and either listed on the National Register of Historic Places or eligible for such designation, or B, secondary structures over 50 years old deemed important to the interpretation of a specific property or historic preservation district as a whole. The application indicates a request to remove the following structures from the property located in the Keithley Log Cabin subdistrict. And that's the maintenance shop and the two duplexes. The maintenance shop and duplexes are located on the east side of Sutherland Creek on the property. And the Felsberg, Holton, Olivig evaluation and report states that many of the historic buildings on this side of the creek had been removed from the site, including as many as 6 cabin structures, which dated to the 1935 timeframe since the 1960s. The report also indicates that the portion of the property to the east of Sutherland Creek, if removed from the historic district as previously requested, would not diminish the significance of the property on the west side of the creek. The maintenance shop, which was constructed in 1975 under the ownership of the Cheyenne Village, does not meet the 50-year threshold mentioned in code and is not listed or eligible to be listed on the National Register. This structure also lacks architectural cohesiveness through design, materials, or workmanship in terms of the other historic structures found on the property and within the district itself. Staff finds the proposal to demolish this structure to be acceptable under these regulations. This structure could be administratively approved for demolition per section 1704-080C4, and that's the number 4 listed there. However, staff has determined it's in the best interest of the resource and the district for the review to be done by the commission along with the other demolition requests. So regarding the historic significance of the structures, staff used the 5 criteria shown here in evaluating the individual structures for their historic significance. This code section is used basically to determine and provide a designation for a resource as either contributing or non-contributing. Staff has found that the maintenance shop and 2 duplexes do not meet any of the 5 criteria listed for designation as contributing resources to the district. These structures do not embody the rustic style or log cabin appearance associated with the district and were constructed at a later period and not necessarily associated with the main period of significance for this property, which mainly spans from the 20s to the 50s. The structures were also not the work of notable builders, designers, or architects, and are not associated with any historical figures or events from the community's history. The photos here depict the exterior of the maintenance shop. You can see it doesn't use the log cabin construction or have that rustic architectural appearance. The photos here show the interior of that maintenance shop. This is the exterior of one of the duplexes. and the interior of that duplex. These are photos of the second duplex on the exterior, as well as the conditions on the interior. Regarding the required materials for a demolition, Code Section 1704-080C5 outlines A through H as documents that are required to make a determination for a demolition request. And though some of the documentation regarding the structural integrity of the buildings and some in-depth financial information is missing from the application, it is staff's opinion that it is well documented and recognized that these three structures lack historical significance and do not contribute to the property's character or to the subdistrict as a whole. Staff also feels the proposed demolition could actually improve the integrity of the property by only retaining structures that do embody historical physical features and architectural qualities that enhance the historical values identified within the subdistrict. The structures proposed for demolition were not constructed during the main period of significance for this property and do not possess historic integrity in context that is representative of the rustic architectural style. For this reason, it is staff's recommendation to approve the demolition with the finding that the intent to preserve the historic significance is not harmed with the proposed removal. Related to the economic hardship component, which is outlined in section 1704-090. The applicant's narrative states that the maintenance shop and two duplexes are not economically feasible to rehabilitate due to their location. The owner of the property will be seeking approval of a major development plan and major subdivision from the Planning Commission, in which the existing property will be subdivided into condominium or townhome lots for the existing structures. Those would be the remaining cabins and other structures. And the vacant land will be subdivided into buildable lots to be sold individually to private ownership for development. In order to access those lots, which will be created as part of that process, a roadway will need to be constructed partially through the existing property. The city has required that the new road align where Mountain View Road currently ends, thus continuing the road across Sutherland Road onto the current property. The development requirements for this roadway would not allow for these structures to remain in place while maintaining the required alignment from the city. Denial of the request to demolish the maintenance shop and duplexes would not allow for the roadway to be constructed to access the vacant lots intended to be sold by the owner. And not being able to access or sell those lots as a result would result in an economic hardship. Without the demolition approval, the structures would have to remain in place and the owner would not be able to subdivide the property to create the vacant lots without access. In so doing, the entire project would become economically infeasible to the owner who intends to sell the lots to help fund some of the renovations proposed on the remaining cabins. According to the El Paso County Assessor's information, the property was sold by Cheyenne Village, Inc. to Manitou Cabins LLC on January 6th of 2021 for the amount of $1,220,000. Staff is not aware of any previous relationship between the two parties prior to the sale or purchase of the property. The current ownership only extends back to January 6th of 21, which is a time frame of approximately 1 year and 8 months from the time of purchase to this hearing. To staff's knowledge, there have not been any income received as part of any activity on the property under this ownership. The applicant has not provided any information or documentation related to operating and maintenance expenses under the ownership. However, staff is able to track through permitting on the property under this ownership that the owner has spent $62,024 in roofing materials and paid $2,356 in use tax to the city for those materials. This does not include any labor costs associated with that work. Staff is also able to calculate the application fees paid to the city to date, which calculates to a total of $3,975 in application fees and $2,500 in deposits related to those applications. The total cost of all items that staff is able to calculate based on their documentation is about $70,855 in operating and maintenance expenses under this ownership. The applicant can respond to any additional expenses which have been incurred and relating to the operating and maintenance costs. The real estate tax information and documentation under this ownership has not been provided by the applicant. However, the El Paso County Assessor's information lists the market and assessment details for the property. The assessed value is listed at $213,910, and the market value is listed as $797,722. The El Paso County Treasurer's property tax information available publicly and obtained by staff via the Treasurer's website indicates that the property tax has been paid for 2021 in the amount of $16,024.23. No information regarding the structural soundness of the maintenance building or duplexes has been provided, and staff is unsure if the owners intend for the structural engineer, which has been contacted by them, will be reviewing these three structures as well. The applicant can respond to the timing and scope of work proposed for that structural engineer. The City of Manitou Springs Historic Preservation Commission does offer a maintenance mini grant program, which offers up to one maximum award of $2,000 within a 12-month period for certain maintenance related projects in the subdistricts. Priority projects include window restoration and exterior stonework restoration, and staff feels that such a grant could be used as part of the overall renovations of the property. If the owner is interested in applying for this grant, an application can be provided by the city's planning department, and the grant would come before the commission for approval. The state of Colorado also offers historic tax credits for applicable projects that meet certain criteria under the Secretary of Interior standards. However, the 1990 tax credit has expired and is no longer in use by the state, and the 2014 tax credit can only be utilized for residential projects. Staff is unsure whether the proposed renovations would qualify for the 2014 tax credit, because despite the residential zoning of the property is currently assessed under a commercial use. Though the future use will be residential, staff is unsure whether the tax credit can be applied for under the current tax assessment. If the owner is interested in applying for that 2014 tax credit, staff recommends having the property reassessed under a residential use prior to making that application. The tax credit application does require an MCAC and approval from the commission as well. No further information or documentation has been provided by the applicant or requested by staff or the Historic Preservation Commission. Any further information needed can be requested of the applicant by the commission, and the applicant can respond to more detailed questions regarding the specifics related to their claim of economic hardship when they are invited to the podium to speak on behalf of their request. And finally, staff's recommendation. Staff recommends approval of MCAC 2211 for demolition of the maintenance shop and 2 duplexes at 183 Crystal Park Road. Again, though some of the documentation regarding the structural integrity of the buildings and some in-depth financial information is missing from the application, it is staff's opinion that it is well documented that the structures lack historic significance and do not contribute to the property's character or to the subdistrict as a whole. Staff also feels the proposed demolition could actually improve the integrity of the property by only retaining structures that do embody historic physical features and architectural qualities. Structures proposed for demolition were not constructed during the main period of significance for this property and do not possess historic integrity and context that is representative of the rustic architectural style. And that concludes the staff's presentation. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Planner Becker. And I could tell from my package that you and Anna von Nijmegen have worked very hard on putting this together for us, and we appreciate it very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions for staff?
I do.
Please.
Isn't the access road out of our purview?
It is out of the purview of the Historic Preservation Commission.
So it's just an FYI.
It's illustrating one of the needs for it's illustrating a need for the demolitions. Without that access road, as in that alignment that the city is requiring, they wouldn't be able to subdivide the property without access and sell those lots, basically.
Understandable. Okay, thank you.
And just one follow-up question, Dylan. I'm assuming although the staff recommendation focuses on the historical significance, that staff also agrees that they have demonstrated that it would not be economically feasible to either leave those three structures in place or to remove them and rehab them in some other location. Is that accurate?
Could you rephrase the question?
Does staff agree, as the applicants are arguing, that it would not be economically feasible to have the three structures proposed for demolition remain in place because of the plan for the development, or to remove them, to move them to a different location and keep them in place?
In their current location, they would not, if the structures were not demolished, they wouldn't allow for the creation of that access road. And would then, the whole project becomes economically infeasible because they cannot sell those lots to fund the rehabilitations.
Correct. I just wanted staff, since that's not addressed in your written recommendation, to acknowledge that the economic feasibility does appear to not meet the criteria in code. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Porter.
So we're only talking about the maintenance shed and the two duplexes that were built in 67 and the one in 85, not the 1935 cabin at this time. We're not discussing that.
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct. The applicants are going to proceed with a vacation of right-of-way without staff recommendation for approval in the hopes that that cabin can remain in place.
Okay. And so the three structures that we are making just a recommendation then to council, since council does the final decision and the demolition. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you.
Very good. Well, I have no questions for staff. I will save any comments I have until the end of the presentation. So we'll go ahead with the applicants are at the podium. Gentlemen, how are you this evening? I'm going to have you give your name and your current address as you speak. And just to remind the attendees, audience, and others, staff, that we have already heard a preliminary hearing concerning this particular subject. So I think that if you just keep your comments brief, we can expedite this, and then we can get to public comment.
Didn't know if it had come on. Can you hear me? Because it looks like it's on now.
We got you.
Great. Commissioners, Bill Gooman, principal William Gooman and Associates. We are the applicant and planner for Manitou Cabins. And
Address, sir? Address of Gooman Associates?
731 North Weber Street,
Thank you.
Colorado Springs, 80903. To my left is Marty Johnson, one of the principals of Manitou Cabins LLC. He can introduce himself. And to my right is Taylor Stamp, another principal of Manitou Cabins LLC.
Very good.
I'm Marty Johnson. I live at 211 Crystal Valley Road in Manitou Springs. And I am one of the principals.
Taylor Stamp, 1431 West Kuchara Street, Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen.
There's actually two portions of our presentation. We don't plan to make an exhaustive presentation. I think Dylan Becker's presentation on behalf of staff was very representative of our MCAC narrative, which hopefully commissioners did receive a copy of. There were 30 or 40 photographs that were included in there that were provided to you to give you an inventory of the current condition of the three buildings that we are seeking approval for demolition. The slides, the presentation before you, Hannah, you can just arrow down. This is our introduction. This is who you've met. Arrow down. The existing structures within the historic subdistrict for the McLaughlin Log Cabin and Manitou Cabin District are shown on the map in front of you. There are approximately 28 structures that exist. Arrow down. And one more arrow. These three structures, the top two and the one on the bottom left, are the ones that we're wanting an approval for demolition based on pretty much the same criteria that Dylan Becker had mentioned to you. The placement of the main arterial road that's on the site plan was not arbitrary. That was fairly deliberate in the early phases of our development planning for the 9 new lots that we're proposing to develop and sell. As staff had indicated, the garage structure in the upper left there sits right in the middle of the new road that is proposed. If we had an option of realigning the main road to access the 9 new lots, we might not be looking to demolish the garage structure. One thing that I would like to point out, it's been mentioned that the garage structure was built in 1975, and according to our records and finding, was actually 1985 that it was built. So that might make a difference there as far as if it actually fits within the criteria of it being 50 years old or older. We're real close, but we're not there. But given the alignment of the new interior road, that garage is best suited for demolition. The other 2 cabins are, call them duplexes. I don't know if they're actually cabins. They were built in 1967 as far as we're able to determine. We did provide photos of the interior as well as the exterior. They are plywood sided buildings. The interior of both of the duplexes have seen better days. They would have to be completely gutted and refurbished if they were to be reutilized. But again, because of the configuration of the internal road and the requirement for a turnaround to satisfy fire requirements at the end of our new road, we're required to have a 45-foot minimum radius for turnaround of fire equipment in that cul-de-sac. And where these 2 duplexes sit right now, they would literally be about 5 feet from the edge of that cul-de-sac. The other thing that we'd like to point out is one of the items that has come up in other discussions as far as our presentation to the Planning Commission and to this commission as well, is we have an issue with encroachment into the slope that is behind these two duplex units. If those units were to remain and we were not able to use the space that those duplexes occupy right now, we would be forced further into the slope, which would not create a desirable situation. The cabin on the lower right, as Dylan had mentioned, we are not seeking from the commission this evening any request to allow demolition of the cabin. It does satisfy most of the criteria as a contributing structure to the cabin district, and we like it. We want to see it stay. And the only way that it makes economic sense for it to stay is if it remains in the current location, which we've mentioned to you previously, is bisected by the right-of-way for Crystal Park Road. It's not possible to title this particular cabin as long as 2/3 of it sits within.
If I may, I don't mean to interject, but this is not part of your MCAC this evening. It's really not necessary to discuss this particular cabin at this time. We understand the dynamic behind its positioning on the right of way. So you can just circumnavigate that particular discussion.
I
Just stick to
appreciate that.
Yeah, the three buildings in question.
Certainly
Thank you.
don't want
It's
to
all
say too much, but I want to say enough so that you can see the thought process that has gone into this. The one thing that I will mention is, because we were asked the last time to provide a cost for relocating the cabin, and we did provide an itemized cost for relocating cabin 7 elsewhere on site.
And thank you. We saw that in our package.
So we do intend to request for the Planning Commission to approve a vacation of right of way, in which case we hope that that cabin will remain. So I think, yep, there we go. One arrow down. There is the garage location, the garage and maintenance shed. There are the 2 duplexes. And the last arrow is the cabin that's not part of the discussion tonight, but it's on the map anyway. Arrow down, request, arrow, arrow, arrow. We are seeking demolition of duplex number 28 and 29, 30 and 31. Both of these structures, we believe, were constructed in 1967, and the garage/shop building, which was constructed in 1985, as they are non-contributing structures to the Manitou Cabins Historic Subdistrict. And as far as cabin 7, I mentioned we'll seek a variance to try to keep that cabin in place where it sits right now. In the event, and I think this is relevant, that the vacation of Crystal Park Road right of way is denied, the applicant on behalf of the owner will request for cabin 7 to be demolished, and as much that there is a $400,000 plus price for relocating the cabin, and it's just not economically viable to consider that for a 690 square foot structure. And with that, I think we're concluded.
Okay, very good, gentlemen. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask right now if the commissioners have any questions for the applicant. None? None? Okay, very good. Well, gentlemen, thank you for coming this evening. You could retain yourselves for questions possibly later. We are going to be moving on to the open hearing, public hearing aspect of this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I am going to be asking if there's anyone in attendance that would like to speak in favor of the applicant's request. Yes, ma'am, please approach the podium and try to speak closely into the microphone. Your name and address, please. Okay, there's a little button and you see little green lights. There you go.
Little better.
Thank you so much.
Smokes. I'm a singer, so. should
All
be
right,
really
give it to
projecting.
us.
Laura Steinbach. I live at 1 Loretta Lane in Manitou Springs. Neighbors to this particular project, and I just wanted to come here to show my support for Manitou Cabins LLC. They've been incredibly cooperative to neighbors, forthcoming with information. We've walked their property. They've shown us the buildings of that they plan to demolish. They've showed us plans. They've met every requirement that I'm aware of that the city has asked for them. And I am so happy that local folks own it and have a great intention of maintaining these beautiful historic cabins. So hats off to them. And I'll keep it that brief.
Thank you, Ms. Steinbach. We really appreciate your comments this evening. Do we have anyone else in attendance that would like to speak? Okay, I want to just let the attendees and staff know, as they know, staff knows that we did receive a letter in support of this project. Okay, we did receive a letter from Ms. Judy Chronic on Indian Way in support also of the demolition of these buildings. Do we have any here in opposition of this particular application? Any letters, anyone? Any hands from the audience? Anybody raising hands?
Chair Edmondson, we do have 2 individuals signed in online. For those individuals, if you would like to make any comments as part of the public comment portion of the meeting, please unmute yourself.
And I will go ahead and say this. I do see Dale Stamp and then Mary Ruth that are in attendance showing on the screen. If either one of you have comment, could you please raise your hand? Very good then. Thank you, Hannah. Well, we will go ahead and close the public hearing aspect of this application and open it up to commissioner discussion. Commissioners, do we have any questions or anything, concerns you'd like to share at this moment?
I would simply indicate, I think that staff and the applicant have done a very thorough job in documenting each of the requirements listed in code. And I think they have proved their case. And I would be ready to make a motion.
Very good. No? Okay, well, I would just like to thank the gentleman coming this evening, all your hard work on this particular property. I've been watching it very closely since it bears the namesake of my great grandfather and the Keithley family. And also it'll be nice to see these buildings go. So that way, when you do subdivide this, as you know, the buildings and I think the audience is aware that anything is built will have to be in the spirit of the log cabin district. So I will entertain a motion if we have one.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that because we had that report on the property and it was so detailed, I think that really helps inform our decisions about what we need to do for that. I do wonder about some of the trees, in the pictures, the big trees. I'm hoping that they try to preserve as many as they can. And when they put, when they do the demolition, to protect some of the trees and the foliage that's around there as much as they can. Otherwise, I agree with Ann on the presentations. Thank you.
Sure, and I'll go ahead and make a comment to that, Commissioner Porter. I would say about 6 months ago, we had an arborist come through the property and do a lot of work to the willow and the silver maple and other trees that are in that area that were unstable and had broken limbs and whatnot. They did have to take down a couple of trees that were unstable, but they did trim up a lot of trees and give them hopefully a few more decades of good life. With that, I'm ready to entertain a motion.
So I would move that we, and I guess we're recommending approval of MCAC 2211 based on staff's recommendation with an additional finding that it has been demonstrated that it would be economically infeasible to not demolish, to try to renovate and not demolish the 3 structures.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
The vote is unanimous, gentlemen. You have your demolition approval from us, that is. And I think we have one more item, and thank you all for coming this evening. We have one more item on our agenda this evening. That is item 3, discussion regarding goals and visions related to the city budget. Not quite sure what it is we have with that. I do see our city administrator, Denise Howell, in the audience. Can you enlighten us what this may be about?
Thank you, Chair Edmondson. For the record, Hannah Van Nimwegen with the City of Manitou Springs Planning Department. So as we are rapidly approaching, and I guess I should say we are in the middle of budget season. And so it's important that we discuss the planning department's budget, but specifically the budget that's within the purview of the Historic Preservation Commission. So that's what I was hoping to talk to tonight and make sure that it reflects what you would expect from us in this next year.
Can we have a raise?
As long as I get one too, just kidding. So just as a quick overview of what we're hoping to propose. So historic preservation incentives is a budget line of $5,000. That is in a continuation from 2022. That's something that exists in the budget now. This is essentially a program that helps reimbursement or to help reimburse homeowners from costs that are are basically triggered because they have a historic property. And most commonly, that means reimbursement of up to 25% of additional costs to install or to add color to concrete in accordance with our codes. The other piece is a historic preservation grant. Essentially, this particular budget line is a pass through from the state. So if a homeowner were to apply for a state grant, we would actually pay them from the city's budget and then the state would pay us. So this is just front loading that so that we were able to hop on a payment quicker than having the state send it directly. The third is where the fun stuff kicks in. So we are proposing a budget of $21,400. This essentially would cover sending 2 planning commissioners to the Saving Places Conference with travel and lodging. I've been to this conference. I'm not sure if anybody here has, but I found it really informative and I really enjoyed going.
What? What's
Yes.
this?
Yeah. So, and they have specific training. They have training for historic preservation commissioners specifically. So I wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for commissioners to attend if you wanted to. I'm not going to force you to go, but
I'll pay my own way.
Secondly, this also allots $10,000 for sub-district sign toppers. That's something that's in the budget now. And we would be wanting to carry that forward into 2023, largely because we want to give us the extra year to get those installed. So we have started to research what it would take to install those, looked at design options, and then how many we would need. So we're starting to pull that information, and I'm just not confident that we'll have them installed by the end of the year. So this would be allowing us to take 2023 to finish that project.
Nice.
The third item is another $10,000 to continue an existing program, which is the maintenance mini grant program. It was kind of mentioned tonight, but it does allow up to a $2,000 award for applicants when they are working on specific projects or maintenance related projects for their historic home. It helps alleviate some of those additional costs that are usually found with renovating older homes. So that program doesn't, I don't know how out in the, or how aware the public may be of that program. We don't have a lot of applicants, but we are intending to put out a huge information blast that this program exists and continue it into 2023 because I do see a lot of value in it. Lastly, or I guess I should say, our goals for this budget is to continuing education for commissioners is specifically related to historic preservation. Also incentivizing preservation by supporting maintenance work, supporting that Manitou aesthetic like colored concrete, and supporting state grant opportunities by acting as that pass-through. We also are hoping to further identify sub-districts by distinguishing them through these sign toppers. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on is what input do you have for staff? What would you want to accomplish in 2023 that we can make sure we're working on and planning for? Or if you think this is a decent summation.
I guess my one question would be, when we finish the kind of plan about surveying the entire community, and I think whoever did that, and it may have been FHU, identified sort of priorities. And I think at some point we had intended to go for grants to help get that done. Has that progressed at all?
Thank you, Commissioner Nichols. That's a great question. So in this year's budget, we had allotted some level of match for doing this survey. However, before I started, the grant hadn't been for. And so that kind of left us out of luck for 2022. Right. 2023, we're going to look at other opportunities because we are pursuing with other high priority projects with the State Historic Fund, like the Carnegie Library and things like that. So, and we're also looking to what we can accomplish in-house. So some of that work may be something that we can work with a series of graduate students to help fill out those survey forms. What other options exist outside of hiring a consultant? But it's definitely on our priority list as something we want to, that is important, especially those high priorities that are listed in that document.
Great, thank you.
And then Hannah, Doug, can I talk?
Yeah.
Okay. Just Hannah, when you heard the presentation from Jake on FHU on the inventory, I think there's a great value in starting to get some of our properties under that. I understand we have 3 big projects plus a swimming pool. Things are happening in our town. And I just want to say that to continue with Jake Lloyd when we can, to start getting the surveys done. And I appreciate graduate students, but I think the professionalism of his company and how they do their research is real important that we start looking at our surveys, since the last ones were in the 80s. And I understand about not having it in 22 and maybe even not in 23, but certainly it's something that we need to keep in our in the back of what we need to do.
Thank you, Commissioner Porter. I did take a note and we will look further into that.
Thank you. Otherwise, it looks good to me, the budget, what you have put down.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Porter. Yeah, it looks fantastic. I guess one comment I would have is the sign toppers. I'm very interested in that. I would take that's going to be a sign that would go on top of streets, signs, identifying a sub-district with a name and possibly some sort of icon on it. Will we be able to review and vet those icons, signs that are going on top?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that depending on what we wanted to do, we could do some type of sub-district visioning where maybe some residents come in and maybe they vote on what their favorite is, or we work with the Historic Preservation Commission. There's a lot of options, but we definitely want input on what is most appropriate.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and I feel that when you have things like sign toppers, it gives people more of a sense of place when they're in a historic district, and particularly when it comes to the survey. We got a great overview from them earlier, but these property by property surveys, when somebody new comes to town, they buy a property and they say, hey, what is this about? Who's telling me what to do with my property? And they get this sort of pedigree about their land. Again, I think it gives them a sense of stewardship and may even give them a more encourage them to be more sensitive to the preservation of their home. So I agree with that completely. Anything we can do to help.
Great, thank you.
And with that, I don't believe we have any more items on our agenda for the evening. So I will call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Meeting adjourned.
Bye, everybody.